Hello friends, I'm Kanchan from Akulmach Technologies and you are welcome to our show. Today we have a very special guest and she is Professor Amita Sinha. She is a former professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture at the University of Illinois. She also taught in the Department of Architecture and Regional Planning, IIT uh, Kharagpur, and she is also associated with Humanities and Social Science Department at IIT Gandhinagar. She is the author of Landscape in India, Forms, Meaning and Cultural Landscape of India, editor of Landscape Perception and co-editor of Cultural Landscape of South Asia. She is also recipient of Fulbright Nehru Academic and Professional Excellence Award. So without wasting any further moment, I would like to welcome Professor Amita Sinha. Welcome to the show, Mrs. Amita Sinha. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you for inviting me.
Actually, we had been discussing about the art and architecture of Indian temples a couple of days back, and I was so interested to really know about one aspect of temple building, which is mandala, because nowadays everybody wants to learn mandala. But what is behind this concept of architecture when we talk about this mandala? So I would like to ask you, what is the meaning of mandala?
So, the mandala literally means a circle, and in the context of architecture, the mandal implies unity and completion and auspiciousness. So, the circle as a figure, as a form, becomes a miniature of the whole universe as the Hindus understood it to be. But we don't live in a circular world or a world dominated by a circle. So the circle has to be squared. And this interplay of the square and the circle is what we see in the mandala forms. And if I go on to the screen, we can see two Thangka paintings, Tibetan Thangka paintings. The one on the left shows the square within the circle. The square brings in directionality. East is a favored direction, and then north, south, and west also acquire values. So in this Thangka painting, you see the Buddhist deities guarding the directions. On the right is the circle within the square, and within the circle is the Sri Chakra yantra. A yantra and mandala are sometimes used interchangeably, but the yantra is more of a symbol of a deity and a meditation device.
For our viewers, I just want to tell them that mandala is like a floor plan of universe. And when we talk about these mandala pictures, you see, I have many times seen these yantra also there in our a house temple sometime, and we pray. But now at this point of time, I would like to ask you that what is the link between mandala and the Hindu temple?
So the temple is a later development. In the past, in the ancient past, in the Vedic times, the main ritual was of sacrifice, and the sacrifice signified the birth of the cosmos, because something had to be destroyed for something to be created. And these sacrificial altars, the Vedi that you see in this photograph, was the form, a square form, and the dimensions and the proportions are actually codified in the Silva Sutras, which date back to 4th century. So, at some point in time, what happens is that divine is embodied in a deity, in a sculptural deity, and so the temple becomes a house of gods. And the plan for the temple is the Vastu Purush Mandal. Now, the Purush is a kind of esoteric concept. What exactly does that mean? Purusha, the human form, but it's really, in this case, in the case of Vasapurush Mandal, it is the spirit of the site, and that spirit of the site can be very malevolent or benevolent. We don't know. It's kind of it's a lower spirit, so to speak, and so that spirit has to be subdued, and the higher gods have to be invited, and they to make their home. So that is how the mandal becomes a house of the gods. And in this Vastupurush mandal diagram, you see that Purush, the spirit of the site, is fitted within the square. East is, of course, a favored direction for the temples, and the temples began to be planned on an elaborate grid, a mandala grid, going up to as much as 64 squares, the Manduka Mandal.
Yeah, so actually, I whatever I have read, it is like that. If we are want to understand the mandala uh, art and the mandala form of architecture, so this circular design symbolize the idea of life, which is never ending, and everything which is connected. The mandala also represent the spiritual journey of individual. So now I would like to ask you, when this first temple built, which represent the mandala, and where in India?
So you're absolutely right. The mandal is the spirit, the nature is the primary inspiration, and the nature's rhythms are symbolized in the circle, and then the circle, becomes a square, and this interplay of circle and square, is what we see in the temple form. But let me also say, as temple worship began in maybe third, fourth century CE, the temple form became quite elaborate. So while the mandal was the plan, the form of the temple was actually the whole universe, the cosmos. And so in the temple, you have the Garbhagriha, the innermost cell, which is literally, the beginning of the universe, and this is where the deity is housed. And on the upper diagram, you see these lines of energy emanating from the deity in the Garbhagriha. In the second diagram, you see this circular form, which is the parikrama or the pradikshina around the temple, and that way the mandal is literally recreated by the body going around the temple. And the third diagram shows the temple spire, and usually temple spires imitate the mountain, and so we have this as an axis mundi, the axis of the universe, and the highest spire is over the Garbhagriha, and this is the line, going up to the sky. So your question as to when were the temples first built and where, I should also say that the earliest form of worship goes of which we have evidence is going back to the Buddhist times. And here we see a tree sanctuary, that is, people worshipping the Bodhi tree where Buddha gained his enlightenment, and people worshipping the stupa where Buddha's relics were enshrined. And then we see the Chaityagrahas, the caves where the Buddha relic in the stupa was worshipped. So here I want to draw your attention to the exterior of the Ajanta cave, 6th century, where this Bodhi tree form, uh, leaf form, is there in the window, throwing light inside, and we have the stupa and then the ambulatory passage around it. So the circumambulation of the monks and the interior of this cave temple is of Chaityagraha actually shows the wooden construction of the vault and the rib. So the earliest temples, likely between 4th and 6th century, it's hard to date, but let's look at this Durga temple in Aihole in Karnataka, and it demonstrates the same apsidal form of the Buddhist Chaityagraha with a circumambulatory passage, and we see the tower, a very small, truncated, in a very truncated form in this earliest temple. We also see in the tip of the subcontinent in the Mahabalipuram, south of Chennai, we have these rathas, literally chariots, and the Draupadi Ratha is the simplest form. Again, it is like it's a hut with a straw roof. In stone, this is carved out of a stone with Ganga and Yamuna on either side of the entry, a more elaborate form of Dharmaraj in the Dharmaraj Ratha. So these Rathas, 5 chariots, are named after the heroes of the of Mahabharat. And in the Dharmaraj Ratha, we have actually, layers in which each layer is composed of smaller adicules, like they are called the shalas and kutas. And again, these are the huts with a domical roof, and these are repeated. So the idea here is that the superstructure of the earliest temples is symbolizing all of the universe, which is composed of a number of structures, and it is a multiplicity of them.
Actually, this is more an art form or an architecture which is inclined to Hinduism, or it's more to Buddhism.
So it was derived from Hinduism and Buddhism both share, mantras, yantras, and mandala forms, and the vocabulary is has the same. They have different vocabularies, but the meaning is the same. So in the case of Buddhist stupas, these are dome-like structures. But when we come to worship in a temple, it is more like mimicking a natural form, which is the cave in the mountain. So that is why we call the innermost cell as the Garbhagriha, the womb of the universe, and the spire as a chariot or a viman, and these superstructures are magnificent. And even in the earliest chariots, vimanas, we see the superstructure as composed of a number of smaller, units. So the birth of the temple, I think, really is in the vernacular house, but then it assumes monumental proportion with time.
Okay, so what is the different style of these temple architecture, and how they do illustrate the idea of mandala?
So there are languages, and there are two dominant languages: the Nagara and Dravida style. Nagara broadly North Indian, and Dravida South Indian, and there are many hybrid forms in between. So, but in both the Nagara and Dravida forms, as you see in this diagram taken from Adam Hardy's book, The Temple Architecture of India, the idea of the adicule, and the multiplication of the adicule to make the superstructure of the temple is the same. So in the Nagara style, we have these tapering forms, and in the Dravida style, we have these shalas and the kutas multiplied in layers, and they they are topped by the amlaka, and over that is the kalash, which contains the nectar of immortality. So the unity is achieved in this, the temple structure coming to a point, and that point is the, I think we can read it as the achieving of unity with the divine, or attaining moksha.
So all these impression of mandala and the formation of mandala in building structure, it is native to India, as I can make out. But do we find the impression of this outside of India also, or outside of Buddhism era? I mean, Buddhism art and culture. Do we find these mandal impression in other civilization too?
Yes, the Mandal traveled with Buddhism to East Asia and to Southeast Asia. So we have, very elaborate architecture. The greatest example, I think, is Borobudur in Java, which is based on the Mandal form. And I again want to emphasize the idea of the superstructure of the temple as a symbol of the cosmos. And so even though a temple is like a static structure, built of stone, those are the ones which have survived, to the modern times. It's a static structure, but the symbolism is uh, is that of dynamism, because the universe is always coming into being, right? It is growing, and then it has to be recreated again. And so this growth and movement is communicated in a static structure by the sthapati, by having these multiple edicules. And here in this diagram, we see the downward and outward growth. Again, we see the multiple projection, and progressive multiplication.
Right.
Uh, and so the universe grows and grows and grows, and it proliferates. And just as our universe is today, and it was always was. But the Hindu belief is that there is a cycle of the yugas, and then after the four yugas, there is Shiva dances his tandav, and then there's a new yug begins, and the cosmos again grows and grows.
So, how does this mandala extend beyond the temple to the landscape? I mean, we also find these forms in the modern landscape also.
Yes, so let me come to that. But before that, I'd like to show you just very quickly a few images of the temples at Khajurao. For instance, the Lakshman temple at Khajurao. As you can see in the plan, there is a Garbhagriha, then there are these mandaps, and all of these are, raised on a terrace. And then the temple tower, same in Khandarya Mahadev temple, the idea of growth as in multiple projection, going, and then upward growth can be seen in the adicule, the spire adicule, uh, 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 all culminating in the finial at the Kalash. And then if you go to Eastern India in Mukteshwar temple in Bhubaneswar, again the same idea, but here the Garbhagriha and the Viman are based on a star-like pattern, and in the front is, before that is the mandap, Sabha mandap, Nritya mandap, Maha mandap, and these are for the gatherings. And in the case of Mukteshwar temple and other temples in Eastern India, we see a pyramidal form. In Western India, for instance, here in Madeira, in the Sun Temple, the temple spire is gone, but again, the linear axis with the Garbhagriha, the mandap, Mukhmandap, the Sabha mandap, and the tank in front. And in Karnataka, in the Keshav temple, we see these three shrines of Vishnu, and these are arranged in a kind of cruciform form with a mandap, and all of this is in a courtyard surrounded by, it's a walled courtyard surrounded by shrines. Here, these temples were made of soapstone, and so we have intricate carvings, and all around we see bands of elephants and horses, and also we see Puranic tales, Mahabharat, Bhagavad Puran, and Ramayana literally depicted in sculpture. So the line between architecture and sculpture is very diffuse. Bhadreshwar temple at Tanjavur was the highest temple of its time. It tapers to the top, and it's a very good example of Dravida style. It was built by Rajaraja Chola, Rajaraja the One. And what now we begin to see in the Dravida style is the Gopuram, the entry to the temple acquiring prominence. And it is like that contains Shala shrines, and these are kind of in a curvilinear form. Um, in a concave form. And finally, to answer your question about the temple mandala extending into the landscape, the best example are the temple towns of southern India and Tamil Nadu, on the banks of the river Kaveri. And so we have very famous temple towns in which the whole urban structure of the town is organized like a mandal. So, for instance, in the Ranganatha temple at Sri Rangam, which is an island in Kaveri, we have 7 enclosures, and the gopurams rise very, very high. they were being built right up to the 17th century. And what happens is that the town kind of is enclosed, the outer parts of the temple enclosure now began to house structures from the town. And that way, the sacred area extends into the profane. There is Meenakshi Temple at Madurai is again a very great example of the town structure following the square mandal pattern, and you can see this in the photograph aerial view. Also, the gopurams are tall. The innermost structure consists of the temples of Meenakshi and Shiva, and then the outer enclosures are where the chariots of the gods and of the god and goddesses are taken out. And finally, I'd like to end with the Tiruvannamalai temple town, in which the Arunachal hill is worshipped as the linga. It's called the linga of fire, and it's a very good example of the mandal as you see in the landscape, because all of the different gods are now symbolized by the lingams. And then on the southeast side, we have the great Shiva temple, Arunaleshwar temple, where Shiva is worshipped, and the gopurams are very tall again. And then Shiva is taken on a journey around the Arunachal hill on auspicious occasions.
So it was so wonderful to really know about these architectural skills and people who have already been in this kind of landscaping, this kind of building making. So, do we have more slides to really see? Because I'm so intrigued to really know more about it. Or shall we talk something different? Let's end this and maybe take these slides in our next episode.
Yes, we can continue. Actually, in our next episode, I'd like to talk about the temples of Varanasi, Varanasi being the most sacred city in the Indian subcontinent, and how these temples, which were built much later, still are, communicate the idea of the temple as being a house of gods, and the temple structure as being a microcosm of the universe.
So I think you have to stop this presentation, then we'll be talking more. So actually, so it was so really go through these slides and view these pictures. But now I would like to ask you one last question: is that the universe and sync with the universe and the thought process of Hinduism or Buddhism, I think that are being depicted by mandala form of architecture. Now, can we also do these kind of building creation in our modern times? Are people are inclined to really look into these architectural formation and build something huge in our modern times?
Yes, very much so. The Vastu Purush Mandal continues to be used in house form. In fact, those architects who are exposed in Vastu Vidya are very much sought after, and monumental temples are being built all over the country. Most recent one being at Ram Janambhoomi Temple. It is built by traditional sthapatis, Somnath of Ahmedabad, and this is a Nagara style of architecture.
Okay, so one last question, which I just want to know that many Indian families they do have these yantras, which are the formation of mandala. Some are square, some are in circular form. So this is a representation of an architecture, or this symbolizes something more.
Well, the yantra you will find as an object of devotion, a symbol of meditation, a meditation tool, and usually these yantras, the Sri Chakra yantra is the most popular one, and it consists of triangles, upward facing triangles and downward facing triangles. So the upward facing triangles signify the Purush, the male masculine principle, and the downward facing triangles signify Prakriti, the feminine principle, and they both meet at the point, the bindu, which is the beginning of life. And so the Sri Chakra Yantra probably is the most common one and often displayed below the deities. And also, I think in the on the floor decorations we see the mandal patterns, especially the Sri Chakra Yantra.
Yeah, so it was so lovely to really talk to you and know about this unique concept. And I'm sure that our viewers will have more knowledge about these patterns which we are following for many centuries, but they may not be having knowledge of how important is this mandala formation when we talk about architecture, especially Indian and Buddhist architectural form. So it was so lovely to talk to you, Professor Amita Sinha. We'll be talking more about these formation in our next episode. Till then, bye bye and take care.
Thank you.
Pleasure.